On this episode of the Open Compute Project podcast, you join us at the OCP Global Summit in San Jose, California, where I sit down with Nick Hume from Hume Consulting, who's also the host of the Tech Insider podcast. Nick has a great perspective from being at two hyperscale companies in the past and also a consultant to the enterprise industry. Nick has previously done some reviews of engineering workshops and keynotes at previous OCP summits, so we're looking forward to him releasing the one from this OCP Global Summit this year. Nick's a great technologist to talk with, and we have a couple laughs. I hope you enjoy.
OCP is my favorite conference.
Oh, excellent.
And it's
Thank
an
you.
absolute pleasure to be invited to this and talking to you. So, and we chatted obviously back a few months ago now.
Yeah, you were so kind to bring me on your podcast. So thank you for that. And,
Yeah. Well, so Nick Hume, founder of Hume Consulting. Hume Consulting is kind of we do a lot of project work and then fractional CTO and CIO type work. So essentially what that looks like is I work with software, infrastructure, hardware, and kind of capital markets businesses to help them, navigate essentially AI, what it means to them, how they want to invest, how they want to think about it, how they want to implement it. And so some of that looks like, in one of the businesses I work with, it looks like deploying an orchestration layer of software out to creatives that work for, Universal, Disney, Pixar, et cetera, for them to leverage all of their hybrid and on-prem resources.
Okay.
So really it's a good opportunity for like IT managers and CFOs to kind of get some wins. So I sort of work in that space. And then with another startup I work with, it's literally deploying generative AI hardware. So looking at the reference architecture, working out, how to stitch this together, finding the power, finding the data center space, and standing up even cloud services on top, deploying and then operating it thereafter. So, I serve as a CTO of that company. And then for the capital market side, I do technical due diligence across these investments. So companies want to invest, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into these large GPU as a service type businesses. However, they're deploying that capital, and I help them kind of work out, is this real? Is this right? What's the risk profile? And essentially help them navigate that decision and mitigate, or at least highlight the risk that they might not otherwise see from a technical point of view.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of pretty broad.
Yeah.
But really sort of the passion, sort of where I came into this was from the immersion side, which is why I love OCP, because it's huge into the immersion, obviously liquid cooling coalition. So I'm kind of grounded in the digital infrastructure and the sustainability as it relates to how you dissipate the heat, how you manage the power, et cetera. So I kind of essentially peanut butter that across a number of different ways to help businesses with that experience.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're connected at multiple, almost all the layers of our infrastructure. You have this tie back, but where you meet your customers at, or your partners at the user side, software side, all the way down to the technical side. Obviously this conference, OCP, is highly technical.
Yeah.
I want to dive in a little bit of we're at Global Summit. It's our biggest event here with 7,000 people here.
Sure.
And so that growth, it's obviously more than technical people. There's visibility here. There's businesses. How do we leverage OCP? What is this OCP thing? What's your take from the enterprise perspective? And as you're consulting, as they evaluate solutions, be it open, be it using liquid cooling, what resources do you have? What do you bring to your customers when they're navigating those decisions? And, pick a layer in the stack that makes, fits best.
And the challenge is obviously to be broad across a lot and to be, across the depth as well. And it moves so quickly, as you know, right? It's incredibly fluid.
No pun intended.
Pun, exactly. To be trying to sort of do it. So, I don't think there's anyone that can be an expert in all of them, but the fact that all the experts are here at these conferences, they contribute to your work streams. They contribute to, they're on the, you guys publish this on YouTube.
Right.
It's all live, it's all open, it's all, anyone can come in and check it out. Which is what is fantastic about the community that OCP has built. Essentially it's, if I think back to the days I was at Amazon back in 2014, one of the most compelling statements that was made by a VP at the time was, the quietest or the most junior person in the room has equal rights to raise their voice and ask a question as I do, being the VP. And so, it's not the smartest person in the room. It's not the most senior person in the room that gets to ask questions. And so really, that's what I love about OCP. I think that's what the openness is. It's that ability to bring in anyone from any walk of life globally and sort of, give them a big warm hug. And then, hey, if you want to be involved in this, or you want to contribute to that, or you want to learn about these things. So I think that's great. I think the way that it's obviously grown, you said 7,000 this year.
Yeah.
Last year, I think you said yesterday was like 4,500.
Yeah.
So that's a significant growth.
Yeah. I think there's at least a correlation with the AI boom and our attendance. But yeah, it's good to see that growth.
Yeah. And which is great. It's a credit to you and the team. It's awesome. So, where I think it's really interesting from an enterprise point of view is what I've observed, I guess, from the enterprise is if you think about AI and that's sprinkled in every aspect of every work stream, it has an impact on every single layer of from network to hardware to DC.
There's no escaping it.
You can't
if you're in infrastructure and any infrastructure, I mean, that could even be broad.
Totally.
You're impacted by this.
Yeah. And if you look at it across the board, you see that, a lot of that infrastructure, a lot of that capital is being, really flooding into the tippity top is what I refer to it as. So
is that a technical term?
It is. Yeah. My 9-year-old taught me that one.
Okay, good.
And so maybe my 6-year-old. And so really what that's going into is, and you work with Meta and they're a huge contributor to the OCP space.
Sure.
Is large training models, large digital infrastructure, scaled out deployments. And they're working at incredible scale that not many others are doing, like XAI is doing, the hyperscalers are doing. And so when you look at it, I see a lot of movement in that area. Where I'm hoping to see more is, let's call it the modest middle. So I think what is happening is that's the top. It's a lot. The bottom is proof of concepts and kind of dabbling and
sure.
experimenting, et cetera. Where I'm hoping to see more of is that modest middle, which is the enterprise.
Yeah.
This is, we want to use our data in our, on-premise, or at least, in our secure, sovereign, data centers or close to us, but we don't want it public. We don't necessarily want it in the public cloud.
Right.
Talk to any European, they don't want it to go into a hyperscaler that's American owned. And so that modest middle is, how does this work for us? I think today you're seeing a lot of those customers continue to pay the hyperscalers,
right,
begrudgingly, like their prices are going up because they're using more. The prices are going up. They used to go down.
Right.
You remember?
Yes, it's been a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's been flipped. So I think I love to see more of what OCP is doing. And, Yoda was last week too, and other conferences. But I'd say the modest middle is kind of looking for, how does this impact me? There's a bit of a wait and see approach. Some are dabbling, some are spending a lot of money. And so there's a wide spectrum of it. So it has been my experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting take. It's easy to believe because it's like history repeating itself, right? Yeah. When in the cloud boom, the cloud era, you had easy access, low cost, but those were at very large scale, cloud-based service providers.
Totally.
Or you had on-prem, which is where you came from, right? So, that's where most people entered the space, right? And then you have colo and you had the middle. We don't have that in AI yet. I mean, we do in limited pockets, like you even mentioned one, like GPUs as a service.
Yeah.
Those options are out there. But I think they're still pretty small at scale.
Totally. Well, I think the other thing as well is, the IT industry has typically been vendor lock, right? It's been sort of customer hostile. It's been, buy my licenses and, there's restrictions around what you can do with them and how you use them, whether it's from Oracle or Microsoft and then it kind of, again, the table flipped and the hyperscalers came out and said, you can buy cloud anytime you want. You can use it on demand. You can pay by the second. It's great.
And now you put anything you want on it.
Put anything in it.
But you can go to Amazon. You can run Llama on Amazon now.
Press a button.
Right.
Or you need a credit card. And so that ease of that friction and complexity has been taken away. That on-ramp is very smooth.
Right.
However, over time, that vendor lock has started to creep back into those services because once you're in, and they're compelling services, by the way. They're fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Like
Sure.
the hyperscalers have built an incredible business.
Yep.
But it's a little more vendor locked than it used to be. And it's difficult to sort of move between and around, and kind of when you want to do it back on-prem, there's a lot of data repatriation. And so I want to pull that back. I want to own this stuff. I don't want to train for models. And so you're kind of getting a bit of a flip there. And so again, that tide kind of going in and out has opportunity for people like those, tier 2 or second tier, GP as a service, or walk in there and see all the innovation that goes on.
Oh yeah.
There's a huge opportunity as these, tides shift for companies to come in and create value.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's an opportunity. I agree with your take that there's a gap. It's neat to see companies like Qscale out of Quebec is here. They have an OCP ready data center for things like this. And then Align Data Centers is now part of our program. But there's not many in their company right now. And I do think that we'll probably see more of those. We'll need to, right? What's some of the challenges for serving that market? Like they have the space. Some of them, like I would say Qscale and Align, are definitely from a technological perspective, like built for AI or have very recent modern data centers that can do this. We have others in the space that are legacy providers. Sure. They were built for 10 kW a rack, maybe. They've been using 3 kW a rack for the longest time. How do they move in the space?
It's difficult. I mean, you've got those brownfield versus greenfields, essentially, is what you're kind of referring to.
Yeah.
And then even greener field, which is built now.
Right.
And you look across those legacy data centers, and some of them are doing, retrofits. They can be expensive. And so they're looking at their asset and saying, well, what's the usable life of this data center? Is it 5, 10, 20? Like, where am my life cycle? Am I?
Right.
And, what are my, costs of running this business? What is the opportunity cost? And so essentially a CFO is looking at that opportunity cost and evaluating what to do next. And potentially dabbling in some of that liquid cooling, infrastructure, because they have stranded power, or they have stranded cooling, or stranded, white space. And so you can kind of Jenga it together, or maybe Tetris. Jenga's not the right analogy, but to try and utilize that space. But
I think Jenga is what they're afraid of.
Exactly. That's
it's like,
right.
okay, I'm going to put this cooling in here. I pulled out the wrong piece and it has all fallen over.
Totally. So I think they're sort of working at that unit economics to some degree, and establishing whether that's which data center to do that in and which area to do it in. Is the customer there? Are the customers plural opportunity, there as well? So I think that's kind of one aspect. And then, what's the cost of going and doing, liquid cooling? What's the cost of making a rack that does 10x the capacity?
Right.
It's from 10 to 100.
Right.
Or beyond.
Yeah.
Today, did they open sourced and contributed a 140 kilowatt reference design, which, people are in the last year or so looking at NVIDIA saying 120 kilowatts in a rack for Blackwell.
Right.
Meta's saying, that's nice. Here's open source, designed to do a liquid cooled rack to 140.
Yeah, we had 2 big announcements. By the time this goes out, it'll all be available. But right now, you can go to opencompute.org and you can download all the 2D and 3D files. For both NVIDIA has contributed their GB200 NV72 setup, which is largely ORv3 based. But obviously some custom tailoring, things that had to be upgraded, power, a handful of other things to accommodate NVIDIA's architecture. And at the same time, Meta saying, yeah, we're doing it too. And here's our take on doing that, on moving from historical legacy ORv3, OpenRack version 3 into the AI era. And it's 140 kW.
Yeah.
So that's wild. And I think those are like, we gotta get this going, because it seems like they're going much higher than that.
Yeah.
Quick.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the keynotes yesterday, which I caught the back end of, but everyone's talking about essentially the same thing to some degree, which is power. Where is it?
Mm-hmm.
Have I got it? What do I do with it? And how can I get more? And where is it? Where are those pockets available? And then it's the heat and cooling. Now I've got it. I want to turn up all this infrastructure. How do I dissipate that heat? How do I manage it? what do I need to look like? Because it's basically at odds with how the cloud industry has worked up until recently is, high density, but modest power usage.
Sure.
And incremental optimizations of sustainability goal, target, progress. And AI just blows that up. It comes from the power, the heat, the physical space you need, the networking, the copper. Like it's just more of everything.
Right.
So it's kind of crazy to see, it needs OCP to really, uncover all those innovations that need to happen across every area. So I was watching the SpaceX launch and the recovery earlier this week, and I drew a comparison to OCP because essentially, there are a bunch of incredibly smart people working on a very difficult program, and essentially flawlessly caught the booster returning back.
Yeah, like clipped it out of the sky with like chopsticks.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it was like like some kind of Karate Kid kind of move.
Right.
And but then I was kind of making the comparison to OCP, and it's kind of, you guys are the digital infrastructure equivalent. Mm. You've got all these incredibly smart people working across arguably, many more problems, because it's from the power generation to supply, distribution to, all the way through to the software layer to the user on the other end. And so that's a very broad spectrum of use cases. And so, but, you're doing it all in parallel.
Yeah.
At the same time. And the beauty of it, you must really love this part of your job, and I'm sure the team does, is seeing across those work spectrums and intersecting and connecting the tissue between them. That's duplication. There's a gap. And then you guys should meet. You folks should go work over that. And really, steering and stitching that together.
Yeah, so, it's interesting to see it now, because we've grown it started in 2000, we're 13 years into this now from when it was started. And then it was like 5 projects. We're at 12 projects, top level projects. So then that means we have like nearly 200 work streams and projects going on in parallel. And, we have all these verticals, but now we're starting to think about them as verticals and horizontals. Like sustainability is a project, for instance. Well, that's not really a vertical. That's a horizontal that goes across multiple technical spaces. And then as we go into the AI space, one of the things we're also trying to adapt to the AI era is, historically AI, OCP has been very good about component level innovation. Right? We're working on a server, we're working on storage. We have all these activities in parallel, but you really, when you look at these AI systems, you really have to look system level, and you have to bring them all together. You have to, as you described, like, that looks interesting. Are you talking to this person? And so we've really been trying to adopt the framework to accommodate that innovation that is multi-layered innovation, where immersion cooling has to be talking to server because you have material compatibility issues. There's many more examples like that.
Yeah. Well, I think without OCP, I don't think you would have the Ultra Ethernet Consortium either, right? Wow, so that thing is like, I think that laid the groundwork for that to happen. And that is incredibly important work stream in and of itself, and products that will kind of, fall out the other side. I think late this year, I think AMD announced one last week, I think one of their Ethernet controllers. And so that has huge opportunity to essentially continue to push Ethernet, which no one thought would get to 400 gig,
right?
Let alone beyond.
Yeah, 800 gig now is what we're talking about?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at their roadmaps and it's 1.6T and it just keeps going. And that's incredible to look at. And, and that's going to produce heat, and that's going to need more power.
Sure.
And so it's kind of crazy to think that these things continue to move. But what's interesting is, and I sort of refer back to that vendor lock piece, is that, right now it's NVIDIA when it regards to AI. AMD's got some great chips and infrastructure, but there's some gaps there on the software side and obviously on the networking side, like I referred to with the Ultra Ethernet Consortium. And so that those gaps are closing.
Right.
And again, without OCP and without that community and collaboration, I don't think those things would be as progressed or as advanced technically, because you have so many more people working on it that have a similar interest in the outcome.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting to see companies like AMD and Intel working together. You have, as you said, this NVIDIA, and AMD as well. Like you heard from Meta yesterday, if you're using a AI service through Meta, through WhatsApp, through Facebook, whatever it may be, it's on their AMD system, right, for inference. Certainly they're using NVIDIA chips as well for training and other things. But again, I think that that's still the scenario, like we talked a little bit of the infrastructure level, like that middle is missing, even from the consumption of those chips. Like the top is for these massive
Tippity
systems. The tippity, technically, it's the tippity top. Thanks to
Patent
Nick's
pending.
6-year-old. That's where a lot of innovation is happening. And then at the more specialized or customized area or proof of concept area, you do have these smaller things going on. But yeah, the maturity of the bell curve, I think, is probably what we're looking for.
Totally.
You've done reviews in the past of OCP. So selfishly, I brought you on the podcast because I've read your reviews and how we first connected, or how I first was aware of what you're doing, is I'm like, there's somebody talking about OCP out there and is doing this amazing translation, I'll call it, like for the masses, of all this technical content. You're watching all these videos, which do become available. So if you want to be part of the conversation, you do have to be here at our summits, but you can consume all the content, through YouTube and other means. What got you interested in that? How'd you start that?
Yeah. And again, a shout out to the production folks that do that online. And this thing takes a village, like you were here on the weekend. And so it's no one person, it's a group of people, not surprisingly. But I did that last year. I wasn't able to make it last year. I was here in 22. I was able to make it here in 24. So thank you for having me here.
Of course.
And, and I selfishly, like, ultimately I look at it and I go, I'm interested in these 3, 5, 10, areas, whether it's sustainability or the cooling or, AI or networking. And this is the epicenter of each of those things. Like how else would I want to consume it, from the horse's mouth, the technical people that are working on the project? I don't want to go to a sales event and it's like, oh, look at my thing over here, and
if you're shopping, that's great.
Sure. but you're only getting it from that one person.
That's true.
So you're getting, ultimately a semi-biased view of the world. And, if you want to buy that, I also can bundle this other stuff with it. And so is that what I personally want to see? Not really. And what I found is there's a lot of other people that like that, analysis and sort of, gravitate toward that. So not necessarily the outcomes, but just the translation layer, if you want to call it that, of decoupling the complexity and kind of translating that to, what does this actually mean? What do I need to do? What do I need to think about? How can I think about it?
This is your Wayne Gretzky, Nick Hume strategy of like, where's the puck going to be?
I think so. Yeah. So I attempt to do that. Others do a better job. But that's what I try and do. But I think it can be incredibly overwhelming and somewhat kind of, people recoil at the complexity. Again, there's technical people here. You walk into those workshops and you're like deep into network packet,
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. Even the keynotes. I talked to some people who are coming here from very much either an enterprise or business development perspective, and they work in a technical space. They're trying to see where things are going, but they're like, yeah, some of these are way too far in the weeds here.
Yeah. So I just like to, and whether it's with OCP or other things like that, demystification of complexity, I get a dopamine hit for doing. And I selfishly look at those areas for my own interests, whether that be the businesses that I support or could support in the future, and figure, the more I know about this, the more value I can add.
Right.
And so if I can share that knowledge, essentially everyone wins.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I appreciate you doing that. I will also say that you were early on that to some extent. I don't know if you're first, maybe, but like we have a lot of technical outreach. We have a lot of workshops, things we do between the events, things like that. But, it seems like just in the last 2 years, data centers have become mainstream, right? Yeah. People just a couple of years ago, people are like, you work in data centers? I was like, what's that? And now, and there's still a little bit of that, but certainly data centers are all over the news, all over, I would say mainstream media to an extent.
Yeah. Well, I think they've been working in the shadows to some degree. I mean, buildings are not manned, right? Like they are hosting critical data and infrastructure. And so their security is through obfuscation and basically hiding in plain sight. And, again, I worked at Amazon and Microsoft, and you would go to, well, and not the Microsoft buildings, but essentially the Amazon data centers back in the day weren't marked. They weren't on Google Maps. You couldn't find them. It was all very, behind closed doors, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, they don't have like ribbon cutting ceremonies typically.
No, and they're not like, setting off. Look, we're at Yotta last week, and they, had a drone show to detonate some buildings. They're not doing these huge, elaborate, celebrations, or announcing that they're still there. You just sort of go past a highly secure, fenced, protected area.
Sure.
Like, I wonder what's going on in there. So I think because that's been, outside of, where we've really, what people's interpretations are of it, and then AI has brought it to the forefront. Really, that's, I wouldn't say exposed, but it's like a David Copperfield reveal. It's like the
the Statue of Liberty has been here the whole time.
Exactly. So there's a big reveal, and you're like, oh, that's what that is, and that's what it does, and that's why Nvidia's stock price is doing what it's doing.
Sure.
So it's very in the news, very public, and so as a result, I think there's a lot of interest.
Sure.
But on the flip side, a lot of, let's say, pressure for those businesses, those data centers, to be responsible, to do, to think about sustainability, to implement those things, with the impending, to some degree, regulatory, hammers that it will come down eventually.
Sure.
To some degree. They have in some areas, and they will,
Yeah, Europe especially.
Absolutely. Singapore as well. There's moratoriums against data centers about, like, they must be more efficient, they must be sustainable. And, really there's, again, that regulation and sustainability angle is close to my heart. I think there's a lot of, progress that needs to be made, continues to be made in that space.
Sure.
However, if you look at the reports of hyperscalers, it's kind of not going in the direction to meet their 2030 goals. So that's huge pressure.
Is AI and sustainability like opposing functions?
To some degree, yes. The deployments, and I'll throw in power in that model too, because, to go fast, you're buying up the power and you're getting access to, data centers. You're kind of doing whatever some of the data center companies and hyperscalers and things are kind of doing what they need to do to meet this insatiable AI demand.
Yeah, of course.
It's out of control. And so as a result of that, would they do it if they could go a bit slower and be more sustainable, whether they choose, different, cooling and heat rejection solutions, or will they choose what's available?
Right.
And so what's happening is that time and demand is a forcing function to some degree against that sustainability need.
Right. And
that's taking something of a backseat. And so you asked me before about enterprise.
Yeah.
What I've noticed is, it's when you're talking about, and again, I'll come from the immersion space and direct-to-chip cooling, et cetera, like liquid, they're choosing those things not for the sustainability benefits, like using less power and being more responsible and lower carbon impact. It's saving me money.
Sure.
Because I'm not spending 25% more on fans spinning in a server rack,
or I've literally reached the limits of physics.
Absolutely.
For air.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't a sustainability. Maybe there's a net sustainability benefit, but it wasn't the driving
decision. It comes along
decision.
for the ride. Yeah. Which is a little bit sad if I'm, but we live in a capitalistic, environment. And so that you can see how that happens. But I just hope there's a little more responsible, decisions that are made over time once demand, let's say, I won't say, flatlines, but essentially like just flattens out a little bit, so we can take the foot off the gas of what is the absolute, thing we need to do today versus what is the thing we need to do today for the thing we're trying to achieve tomorrow.
When do you think, this is an impossible question, when it's great for podcasts, when's the foot coming off the gas? Like, demand is one thing, and then like catching demand's another curve.
That's a great question. I would like to think of it as, what's the next, is this the current wave? Does this current wave continue? And I think there's a wave behind it, which actually perhaps, at least from a hardware point of view, might be worse, and higher demand and supply having difficulty meeting it. Meaning, we're talking about training. We talked about the top of the pyramid to some degree,
Tippity top.
the tippity. And so you can use that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I'll license it out. But inferencing is behind that, right? And like I talked about, that modest, middle has this, there's going to be a huge need, demand, and compute requirement to meet those demands and those needs and to, provide that compute. What's interesting though, is you're seeing, Apple's coming out with their Apple Intelligence, and it's on your phone. I mean, your phone is essentially an edge, or your laptop's an edge device. We're coming from the bottom up to some degree on having that inference processing done on device. Essentially, this is almost a new edge. It's happening there. So what I'm going to see is interesting is the software developments moving from large language models and additionally small language models and the specialized ones versus these foundational ones. So I think there's going to be a mix of both LLM and SLM processing done, large training done in those large campus data centers of hundreds of megawatts, even the gigawatts. Some more modest deployments of, decentralized distributed inferencing done near, on-prem, near-prem, close-prem to where it needs to be done, whether that's on device or near device or near user. You think about hospitals and autonomous driving and like all the robotics and stuff needed that needs to be low latency, but modest compute requirements. Like we've got transformer models today that are doing all this incredible AI work for us. There'll be another iteration of that too. So what I guess I'm hoping for, if I had a crystal ball, I think we'll see additional in software space that will direct traffic on what hardware would look like, how it will perform, how many tokens you need to do particular activities, how much power that needs, and I'm hoping that it can't continue to scale like it's scaled in the last 3 years.
Yeah, we're on the training side. Just to summarize, like the machines are getting so big, and like I've been told, and having the privilege of being in these meetings of like, you're not thinking about a computer the same way. Like the data center is the computer.
Yep.
Like it's not a server or a couple servers linked together that are doing load. Like the 72 GPU system is because you're using 72 GPUs at once. And then those are all tied together. So these training machines are turning into tens of thousands of racks, not hundreds of thousands of servers.
Yep.
That's one computer.
Yeah.
Doing one, it's doing multiple tasks, but its output, it's all for one job.
Each GPU in that device thinks it's one GPU.
Right.
That's the trick, essentially. So, when you have it's all of those working in unison, which is why you need the interconnect between each GPU to be at high speed, low latency, and between that, server in a rack to the one above it, to the one in the next rack next to it, to the one down the hall. So I spoke to Tobias Houghton on my podcast last week. He's the CEO founder of a company called Stellia. And they are basically looking at that from the point of view of, this is a networking problem. Once I have a GPU is great, software that runs on it, awesome. A lot of innovation with NVLink and the switch, Broken Band, it all sketches together. What happens when I want to talk to the GPUs outside of that, domain? I want to do it in the next door data center or the data center down the road or across, state lines. And so he's essentially working on the transport layer at the WAN side, which is outside the data center, versus the LAN side, which is on the inside of the data center. And, that progress in that space, and again, that's not necessarily software, it's not necessarily hardware, it's kind of both, but also the protocols that interconnect those devices and systems to stitch them together to have, you go from tens of thousands of GPUs connected to potentially millions, and beyond. And so again, that's really interesting. And those, innovations come from, looking at how much, to invest in AI, like it's one company, it's a lot of infrastructure, it's a lot of money, versus how can I do this in a more modest, way that solves my problem,
or right-sized, and I guess that could mean physical size. That could also mean, now that I'm thinking of things like, if you leave the data center and you go to wide area network, now I can maybe the environmental conditions or power conditions are different at different times of day in those data centers, and shift workloads around so that they're most optimal from cost, sustainability, whatever.
100%. I did some work with an energy grid stabilization product in Australia. So I interconnected grid of all states bar one. Essentially, we were ebbing and flowing with the energy grid, which the grid provider loved. So we could actually absorb those peaks and turn off, during the troughs, helping stabilize the lot of renewables in Australia with solar and hydro and wind. And essentially, that was an incredible, for the utility, that was a hugely beneficial product for them, and they paid us quite well to do so.
Interesting.
But it's the same model that you optimally move it where the power is cheaper or the conditions environmentally, weather-wise. You might want to power off this place in Texas because it's 120 out.
Right.
And so I need to move that somewhere else. And so the ability to sort of, to move that or traffic shift or kind of compute shift, we used to call it T-shift in Amazon. This would be like C-shift, move that compute out.
Yeah.
And no outage, no downtime. It's just, it moves around like throwing water into the ocean.
Sure. And traditional compute cloud can do that. Amazon does that very well. They offer tons of services about where your compute's being done for whatever your needs are, be it sustainability objectives, whatever. And other cloud providers provide those same services. We're not there yet with, especially with training. Yeah. Definitely not there with training. Maybe we're there with inference, or some are doing it, but it's going to be, it sounds like your take is right sizing or right locationing or right resource use. Maybe that's a better way, but right resource use.
Yeah.
To fill the middle, not the tippy top, and not.
Yeah. Well, it's also, you think about a CIO's job. I mean, they look at it from the point of view of going, I've got these infrastructure teams, I have systems teams, development teams, I have all these, technical people on my staff. To go and do something, they try and leverage their own skill set, or they can, say, well, we're going to go and, double down on Cisco, we're going to double down on AMD, or whomever it happens to be, or the technology. It might be like, we're only doing this type of, we're only doing virtualization, we're not going to do that, whatever it happens to be. To change those things has a material impact on other people, which is a very expensive cost, right? Yeah. The resources need to be trained, need to be, employed, they need to be supported. And so that has a huge impact on decisions they make. And so some of those decisions that perhaps, might not make logical sense, make absolute sense when you see behind the curtain of, hey, this is why I'm doing it.
Right.
Because my resources are, deep in Kubernetes, or they're, we don't have any Juniper experience, so we're staying with Arista, or whatever happens.
Yeah.
And so what I guess I'm saying is, over time, some of those, let's call it vendor lock or technology locks, are a little, you can move between them more freely than you'd have before, which is fantastic. I would encourage everyone to sort of look outside of the window there, or the corridor they're kind of looking at, and open some doors, because there's incredible innovation across. There's more than one place to go for network, for server, for, services.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can even look at, there's highly technical resources, right? Where some people feel locked in, either because they are, from a CFO's perspective, locked in because I'm invested in this, or from a human resource perspective, like all my people are trained on this. Now I have to train them out of that to something else. I think that's a big hurdle. One that's even very simple that I thought was interesting is NVIDIA referencing how quick it is to remove the servers, toolless. And one thing that they put a lot of engineering in their contribution is that the cost to have something down, because it is that GPU thinks it's part of all the other GPUs. You have to be able to get it in and out really quick. You can't, in a cloud service where you can be like, well, what percentage of that rack is out? Once it gets to 60%, then we'll go take care of it, but if it's operating at 80, 90%, let it run.
Yeah.
You're not doing that with a GPU. So you need to think about other things. And as things are changing, I think that there is a massive opportunity to look outside of your comfort zone or what you've been doing for the last 5 or so years.
Totally. And there's probably a good segue, came into this, data center space from not a data center background. And so, it's looking at things differently is you're a fantastic example of that, because, the success you've had is because, and this is coming from the folks I've spoken to from, veterans and who come from the military background and other areas coming into this space, whether it's data center, digital, wherever in the spectrum on the digital infrastructure spectrum you sit to land, thinking about things differently. I laugh about this. I'll tell you a little boring story. So when I was at Amazon in 2014, I managed a networking team of incredibly talented and knowledgeable network engineers that are lifelong, engineers. I was never a network engineer. I would never have to manage teams of them, but at the highest of levels and not independently. And I started managing this team and looking at it differently and kind of coming to it from a different point of view. We were a Sydney team that hadn't been a brand new engineering team, meeting up with Dublin and Seattle. And we started contributing in ways that improved the cycle time, improved the process, like implemented automation in ways that hadn't been done before, because we were, again, coming to it with a fresh set of eyes,
right,
and a different perspective. And so that's incredibly important. It's like getting your brand new employee and asking them, what could we do better after 30 days?
right.
Note down every single thing that sucked.
Yeah.
Because we know it, we know you'll find things and then go fix them.
Right.
And then do that over and over and over again. And therefore your onboarding process is smooth as silk for your 10th person or your 40th person or whatever the number. It's that fresh eye, new perspective is incredibly important. If everyone works in an echo chamber, you just get a bunch of yes people saying yes.
Sure.
And the innovation is stifled.
Totally agree. It's interesting, your perspective. I think in our industry today, because of the industry at large is growing, no matter where you are in the infrastructure, where you're building a data center, where you're working in a data center, or you're working on the technology that goes in a data center, is that there's not enough people to do those jobs. So the industry, the royal we, are pulling people from all sorts of backgrounds. And so that's what's been great about coming to OCP, or even being part of OCP, is that there is no, this is the way we've done it. Every day is new. Like every event, we're talking about something new. Every month or every project call, we're going on to something. It's a welcome environment for new ideas.
Totally.
Because of the rate of innovation in this space.
We're seeing it with what I love, I'm looking at here and there's some racks out here and, most people are bringing racks and here's my infrastructure and here's the hardware.
Sure.
One of the streams is disaggregation. Reimagining what a rack is. Right. Don't just put two props and some network devices in the back. This served its purpose. You two talked about the physical limits and the physics limits.
Sure.
Of air cooling. You look at a rack and you go, well, this could be done differently.
Right.
Why are we sort of stuck with these restrictions? To some degree, restrictions help innovation because you end up thinking about things differently, but let's blow the whole thing up and start again.
Right.
If we started from scratch, what would we do?
Yeah. It's a bit of an origin story here at OCP. Racks were PCs under the desk, turned sideways and put in a bread rack.
Yep.
That's at a very basic level. And so start questioning things like, why do we have display drivers on every server? We don't need those. But you did for a long time because that's what it evolved from. And we're at a bit of an inflection point here to just be totally throw it out. We're not even using air anymore.
Yeah.
That's a pretty basic requirement of electronics for the last forever, right?
Totally. No, it's incredibly exciting to see it all kind of take place, and this is the place to do it. So I'd encourage people to sort of physically come here. The videos are great online.
Yeah, if you can't join us here,
it's fantastic. But coming in person and like I've said in previous things, the people is what makes it. The technology is great, the white papers, the patents, all the innovation is awesome, keynotes, etc. But meeting the people in person and having those conversations is how I essentially learn and those relationships are the most important piece of it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that perspective. We've been saying OCP or this, and really OCP is the community. So it is the community. It is the people that shape this, whatever the direction it needs to be to fit the market. And, thank you for being part of the community. I think you're a key asset to our community. So thanks for being here. Kind of wrapping it up, I'll ask you two questions. Since you've been here and we're on day 2,
yes.
Anything that really surprised you that you didn't expect to see?
Good question. So maybe too early to tell.
Okay.
Maybe too
That's
early
fair.
to tell. So yesterday I was, I think a lot more workshops are today that are in my interest area. So like on the liquid cooling side and networking side. So that's what I'll be jumping to
Okay, great.
post this.
Well,
But
jump.
yeah, there's a few more keynotes yesterday, and again, maybe I'll somewhat selfishly, like it's sort of referring to things I think we've been discussing, quite a lot. So it's great to hear that at the SVP level of whomever's up on from Google or from Meta, et cetera. So that's a good message for everyone to understand and learn. So that set a really good scene yesterday. I want to sort of go 1 or 2 layers beneath, in particular my focus areas, today and tomorrow, and look at what's happening there. And you're already seeing some of those things we talked about before. The immersion was doing one thing, direct chip cooling was doing another. Oh, what if we put cold plates on the chips in the tank?
Yeah.
And
if you haven't seen that, that's wild.
Yeah. And, we did, we're doing single phase and 2-phase, but some have got novel ways of doing 2-phase direct chip.
Right.
And dissipating a heat that way. And so some fantastic things. Obviously, this is not live, so people won't be able to go and check this out at the booths.
No.
But I encourage them to check out the different companies that are producing that work. Great innovation and interesting things. So,
well, if they can't see it live, then my next is when can we expect you to do a summary so that they can check out on your website your take once you get into those surprises or details, whether it be multi cooling technologies in one or whatever we may find in the next day or 2 here.
Yeah. So I'll do my little analysis when I get back and look at those. I think last time there was 470 videos.
Yeah.
So that took some time. I didn't look at all 400, but I'll do my a beautiful mind kind of process.
We might need AI to leverage for this
help.
too. Yeah.
That could help. I might use that. But I'll do my process, when I have the window of time to do it.
Okay.
I sort of, it's like coffee, headphones, and then just watch, digest,
get in the zone.
Notes. And so I'm sure there's a better way to do it. I'm sure I take far too long, but I would hope to do that this month. I would have to do it soon after.
Okay.
So it's kind of out there quickly.
All right. I'll hold you
because next month it's going to change.
Yeah, you got to get it out because then it'll be obsolete. No,
totally.
But all right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Nick. I'm so glad you joined us. Any closing thoughts?
No, not really. I think, thanks for having us here. This is a great conference. The summary, the wrap, hopefully will be out shortly. You can check that out on the Infrastructure's newsletter, newsletter that I publish through my LinkedIn. So if you haven't, we can put that in the comments or whatever.
Yeah, I can load it in the comments.
Yeah. I do a Tech Insider podcast, which you gracefully fronted for OCP. Which
you don't have to watch that episode if you're watching this episode.
It's a couple of...
You get a little background on me, but that's not that important.
No, but that's interesting. So I did podcast, and then it's all on humeconsulting.co, so you can get it there. But otherwise, I encourage, check those things out. If you're here at the conference or you did the next conference and the conference after that, come and talk to me. Yeah,
great.
Because I love talking to people. I love learning what folks are doing, what they're working on, and potentially how I can introduce, because I know, you go to enough of these things, a lot of people, you get to do introductions, you do matchmaking type stuff. Like, hey, you guys should talk together. So yeah.
There's so much of that. There's so much of and either any of us run around these conferences, grab us by the arm and be like, hey, because there's just too much to do. And I want to clarify, don't listen to this episode on your podcast, not because you shouldn't listen to your podcast. You've interviewed far more interesting people on your podcast, and the last couple have been really interesting. So,
I appreciate that.
So dive in.
I don't take compliments very well, Rob, so I would take that.
Just say thank you.
Okay. Thank you and smile.
All right.
All right, cool, man.
Thanks.
Great to meet you.